shared ownership is a scam. It's one of the biggest scams perpetuated against first-time buyers. Now, I'm tired of people buying shared ownership properties thinking they're getting an amazing deal, but not being told the truth. They might potentially be signing their life savings away into a financial trap. So in this video, we're going to explore shared ownership. It's been banded around for years. It seems like an easy route or easier route to get on a property ladder. So while it might sound helpful if we're just skimming the surface, but there are a few important things that you need to understand as to why it can become a financial burden and a financial trap, rather than the stepping stone in which it's been promoted. So for the people that are not super familiar with shared ownership, let me explain what it is. So it's a scheme where a first-time buyer can buy a portion, a percentage of a property. So it's usually between 25%, 50%, or maybe 75% or 100%. So if you buy 25% of that property, you will pay rent on the remaining 75% until you own the entire 100% of the property. And the rent that you pay goes to the housing association. So you own 25%, you pay a mortgage on that 25%, and you pay rent equivalent to the 75% to the housing association. There is no specific time frame, so over time, you can increase the share that you own in that property through a process called staircasing. So think about it this way. There are 4 stairs, 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%. You currently own 25% and you can staircase to the next 25%, which takes you to 50%, and then carry on climbing up until you eventually own the whole property. So on paper, it sounds great. You can only afford 25%, you buy 25%, but it's not as simple as it seems. So let's talk about the 6 points that you have to understand if you're going to play the game of shared ownership. Number 1, let's talk about the rent side. You might own a portion of that property, but you're still paying rent on the other portion that you don't own. So in some cases, this rent can increase annually. Let's play around with some numbers. Let's imagine your mortgage is £300 per month and the rent that you're paying is £700 per month. You might assume that you're going to be paying £300 for the mortgage, £700 for the rent, which is £1,000 per month. But at the end of the year, the housing association can increase that rent and there's nothing you can do about it. That means your monthly payments, aka your rent, can end up being significantly higher than the actual mortgage payments you would have been making if you bought the entire 100% of the property, even though you only own 25% of the property. Crazy. Here's an example. Imagine you bought 50% of a £200,000 property. You're still going to be paying rent on the £100,000 that you don't own. And this can add up, which means you have nothing to show for it. You might say, well, my broker didn't tell me. Your broker's job is not your educator. Your broker's job is just to facilitate the finance. So it's important, if you are thinking about a shared ownership property, or you know someone thinking about buying a shared ownership property, please make sure you watch this video or you send it to them, because it's often the small, tiny things that can trip you up and cause you to lose money as opposed to make money. Number 2, maintenance. Even though you're only a part owner, so you own 25% of this property and you pay rent to the housing association for the other 75%, you are responsible for 100% of the maintenance costs. So for example, if your next door neighbor bought their property at 100% and they own that property, they pay 100% of the cost because they own 100% of that property. If you only own 25% of the property, you still pay 100% of the cost. So how does that make sense and how is that fair? In theory, you should be paying 25% of the maintenance cost because you only own 25% of the property. And when you staircase to 50%, you pay 50% of the maintenance cost. And when you staircase to 100%, you now pay 100%. But that's not how it works. You are responsible for 100% of the maintenance cost, even though you only own a small portion of that property. So it means if anything goes wrong in that property, for example, there is a leak, there is a hole in the roof, the lift stops working, the boiler stops working, you are responsible for footing the entire bill. And bear in mind that as you staircase and you start to buy more ownership in that property, your costs also go up as well. You're not just paying rent, you're essentially paying for a property that you don't fully own yet, which again is crazy. So if no one's going to tell you about this, I'm going to tell you about it. One of my biggest issues with shared ownership is that property investing, if done correctly, is supposed to set you up for life or help you build wealth. And unfortunately, shared ownership does the complete opposite. The biggest issue, outside of all the other issues that I have, is the fact that with shared ownership, there's limited growth or limited increase in value for you, because if you only own a small part of the property, but you only benefit from the small part of the growth. So you benefit from the percentage that you own of the growth of the property. Because you only own a small part of the property, you're only entitled to an increase in the value of what you own. So if the property goes up in value, which is where wealth is created, you miss out on that portion of that growth. You miss out on that profit. Let me try this with an example. If the value of your property rises by, let's say, 20%, you will only benefit from that 20% in proportion to what you currently own, to what percentage you currently own. This makes it difficult to build wealth, and that's very frustrating because property that's bought correctly should set you up for life. The increase in value should set you up for life. Shared ownership properties are notoriously difficult to sell. It's crazy that people are not told these things. If you want to sell your share, the housing association has the right to find you a buyer. How crazy is that? It means they get first dibs. They can suggest that they want to sell the property to whoever they want to sell it to. Now, the real issue here is when you sell a shared ownership property, it's typically sold to someone else that's trying to get on the shared ownership ladder, which means you might not get lots of people queuing up to buy your property. Hopefully, if they've watched this video, but that affects you because it means you will not get the best possible value because you don't have tons of people queuing up to buy your property. And if the housing association is responsible for finding you a buyer, that could take some time. And because you only own a part of the property, the pool of buyers, of potential buyers, is smaller. If you buy a property correctly, when you sell the property, you are supposed to make a lot of money, and that allows you to go and buy another property or gives you the freedom or enables you to use that money to create wealth. This is stolen from you via shared ownership. One of the most disgusting things is when you come to sell your shared ownership property, the housing association has a say as to how much you sell the property for. It's controlling. It means you probably will not get the full value that you feel your property is worth. I get it. If your only choice or the only option you have is to buy shared ownership property, then by all means do it. But if you've got other choices, shared ownership should be the last option. Now remember, when you buy shared ownership property, you do something called staircasing. So you buy 25%, maybe 50%, and you climb the stairs, which means you purchase another position in the property, which gives you additional ownership, and that reduces how much you pay in rent because you own more of the property. Whilst it's created to enable you to eventually go off to own the whole property, it's not always as easy as it sounds. Every time you want to increase your share or your ownership in the property, you have to pay for it, which is difficult because the value of the property is still increasing. So in some cases, quite often, you might find that you can't afford to staircase because the value of the property has gone up. Therefore, the percentage that you're buying costs more than the initial percentage you bought. So where does that leave many shared ownership buyers? Well, you're stuck. So for example, if you were buying a £100,000 property and you paid £25,000 for the first 25%, you would wrongfully assume that the next 25% will cost you £25,000. But what if the property value has increased to £150,000 from £100,000? It means your next 25% will be based on £150,000. And you've got to find that money. Otherwise, you are stuck and you carry on paying your mortgage on the part that you own, and you carry on paying rent, which tends to increase while you are responsible for 100% maintenance of that property. I wish they taught this stuff in schools. As we round up, I want to talk about this impression that people have that shared ownership is much more affordable. But if you look at the full picture, is it really much more affordable? Well, yes, in some sense. On paper, you can get to own a property which you don't really own, that you are just paying rent on. So it's a glorified rent, but is it really affordable? Because you're only purchasing a small portion, a fraction of the whole property. So while it's cheaper initially, when you add in the rent that you pay, when you add in the maintenance cost, when you add in the inability to get the full value of the uplift on the property, when you add in the rising cost, when you add in and factor in the admin costs associated with purchasing, when you add in the overall financial burden, you start to see that it's not what's portrayed or what's sold. It might feel like you own the property because you've signed a deed, but you've signed a deed for 25%, maybe 50%. But if we look at it from a numbers point of view, you've got to ask yourself a question: does it make sense? So to round this up, look, shared ownership on paper sounds great. Your financial advisor, your mortgage broker isn't going to give you the ins and outs with regards to shared ownership. But now you know and now you understand, and now you can make an informed decision on whether it's the best option for you. In my opinion, it should be the last resort. It should be the last option because there are so many hidden costs. Hey guys, if you get any value from this video, make sure you like, comment and subscribe. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Have you bought a shared ownership property and it went amazingly well? Are you currently in a shared ownership property and you're struggling? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. This is one part that most people don't know about until you get into the shared ownership trap. Let's swing back around and talk about staircasing very quickly. Every time you want to staircase, which means to buy another percentage in the property, you are responsible for paying for a surveyor, and that could cost you anything from £1,000 to £2,000 just for the surveyor to analyze and tell you how much the value of the property is and how much you have to pay. So you've got to factor that into your cost. So does shared ownership actually make sense? Or is it a way to pretend to people that we are helping them get on the property ladder while putting them in greater financial burden?